Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Ghost and Spirits Encounters video. Well, I wanted to share this bizarre and almost unsettling story that occurred to a user there while they were visiting their mother's home. This is a really strange story. It's hard to say exactly what was occurring here. I have an idea that it may just be something along the lines of maybe even a possession. Again, hard to state, but it's still kind of chilling when you think about it. I'd love to hear what your comments are on this too. But it comes from the reddit.com website. They're from the subreddit called Strange Desert. And the user, the person by the name of Interstellar Gator 23, gives some good information. It's a little brief though on some items, but it's enough again to be able to try to make some assumptions, but still pretty eerie story altogether. But they aptly titled their encounter as Mother with a question mark afterward. You'll see why exactly it was titled that. So let's go ahead and let's share that entry here, and then I'm going to post my own comments on it afterward, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this too. So here's what they stated. I was visiting my mother one day where she lived in Hemet, California, in a retirement community. She was in her 60s by then. My mother had an open floor plan, so when I came in through her front door, I could see the living room and kitchen. And when I entered her home, I noticed her standing in the kitchen, cutting up vegetables on a cutting board, and she obviously didn't hear me come in and seemed very preoccupied with her cooking. So I didn't say anything at first, waiting for her to look up, but she didn't. It could have only been a minute of me standing in the entry when I realized she was talking to herself, but it wasn't her voice. I realized it was a man's voice, and this stunned me into silence, so I did not greet her. I just stood there, watching and listening. Have you ever witnessed something so bizarre that you feel like time had stood still? That's how I felt. As I stood there listening to her, it was as if she was having a conversation between herself and a man, but her voice changed accordingly. First, she would mumble something in her own voice, and then she would reply in a man's voice. The man's voice was very deep and husky. I was like a deer in headlights just standing there watching this scene play out. There was a chill that ran through me, and I knew this wasn't insanity, just like we all know things instinctively. While talking in a man's voice, she suddenly looked up and saw me, and then within a blink of the eye, she was back to herself, cheerfully greeting me. "Hi, sweetheart." I think I debated for a moment whether I should tell her what I just saw, but fear overcame me. I was afraid whatever or whoever was there within my mother would manifest itself again, and then my next thought was just pure sympathy for my mother, my poor mother, what was happening to her. At the time this happened, my mother had been recently widowed and living alone. Now that I am a widow, I look back at my mother's general behavior at that time, and she didn't seem to be grieving much at all. I was devastated when my beloved died. I would sit in my kitchen. I couldn't get out of my chair. My daughter had to come and arrange the funeral and make phone calls. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to smoothly transition through her husband's passing. Was it because there was a spiritual influence in her life? I will never know. And so my mother was a Protestant for part of her life. I am a practicing Catholic to this day. She did not approve of my church. I wanted to bring her to a priest, but she refused. So I coaxed her to return to her church. She never did, and the very sad part is, a couple of years later, we became estranged by her choice. I heard that my mother had invited some young men to live with her as she liked to rescue people. They ended up drugging her and slowly removing all of her belongings from her home. Her neighbors noticed this strange activity and called one of my brothers. It turns out these male boarders were arrested for elder abuse and other crimes. My mother was taken to a hospital and later had a massive stroke from the drugs these men had given her, and so she died of heart failure not long after. A sad ending to her very strange and sad life, and I pray for her soul. And that's it. That's everything that this user, Interstellar Gator 23, mentioned. So let's go ahead and let's talk about this eerie, almost chilling encounter. First off, this is definitely a story where nobody wins. just a sad story all around, from whatever was happening to the mom to then to the user as well, them becoming estranged, and then of course whatever happened with those people creating that elderly abuse for her. What a sad way to go, right, when it comes to the last years of her life. But let's talk about first about the encounter itself. Wow, that is kind of chilling when you think about it. Imagine coming in to any place whatsoever. It could be your mom's, you could be seeing your dad or some other relative or even friend, and then you notice them. They don't notice you at first, but you notice them having a conversation between themselves, and then their voice changes to the other person's, whatever other person they're having that conversation with. I mean, I just got the chills right now thinking about that, because it's more eerie the more you think about it. And here she was, this user, seeing this right in front of her happen while she was watching her mother, again, having her mother having no idea that she had just stepped in. What was that all about, right? Was that some form of, again, possession? Could that have been something along those lines? She had just recently become widowed, according to the user, and yet here she was happily, cheerily, not grieving, but apparently having some kind of interaction with something that was there. And I would love to have read if the user stated if that voice sounded like her dad's or not, or if it sounded like the mom's husband or not. But unfortunately, they did not give that representation. But still, the fact that something could just switch in that person's mind to make them create a new voice, a completely different voice, and then almost like, again, it's a back and forth conversation. That's just too much for me. Like that would definitely be something like the user stated, where it's almost a deer in headlight moment. You just can't look away because you're realizing what you're watching is so unnatural. Very, very scary stuff. And then there was that back and forth too with regards to the mom and then the user's own experience afterwards. She was relegating the fact that on her end, whenever her husband died, there she was in the house almost catatonic, and she had to have her own daughter come around and make sure that things were taken care of. But here, there's this eerie picture of the mother just almost happily living in that retirement community. The fact that it's supposed to be so cookie cutter too, because a retirement community, you just picture that as people in their elderly years, they're living in an area that, looks nice, has good surroundings, has people around you that are just, welcoming and making sure that everything is going good. And then here you have something like this, very bizarre, very, I don't know what it is, possession, maybe even demonic, who knows? And there it is happening in that type of community behind closed doors, no less. That just makes this thing just so, so weird. For some reason, I was thinking of that film Hereditary. I've never seen that movie, actually. I've just seen clips of it. I'm kind of hesitant to even ever watch it because of the almost bizarre, forbidden stuff that's almost seemed to be there. But I keep getting the impressions when it comes to that. And that mother that was in that film, how there she was looking, again, picture perfect, something involving the representation of every grandmother at her best. And then behind the scenes, of course, she was doing something else far more sinister, creepy stuff. But I'd love to hear what your comments are on this topic. So if anybody has any more info, then please post it below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.